obviously it's actually quite early, but nevertheless the crops have grown enough to make some bread from them. So it's thought by scholars that this is a very ancient Near Eastern fertility custom going right back to the very earliest Hebrew tribes, long before Exodus and that whole story. Because what people may or may not know is that the use of bread was first developed in the Holy Land. When I researched all this as an archaeologist student, and I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was young, I always look at the history of ideas through archaeology. I say, where's the oldest example of X or Y, and what does archaeology tell us about it? That's why I love Druidry so much, because there's so much archaeological evidence from all over Europe of these Celtic tribes and their beliefs and so on. I'm writing a book about that. Well, the same with the early proto-Jewish customs. So Theodore Gaster, a very great scholar of Judaism, who wrote a book about the origins of all the different Hebrew festivals and their customs, talked about Shauvot as being this very ancient agricultural festival. And it's really people saying, look, here we are, we're clever, we can make bread, right? Which is a miraculous thing, because A, they had to work out that you can grow the crop, and that took probably, 1 million years of early ancestors. And then you had to work out that you could harvest the grain, and you could, turn it into flour, and then you could mix that with water and bake it. Well, that took literally, probably millions of years. And it was a lot easier than going around hunting with your spear and so on for some gazelle that's leaping about. Bread represented really the possibility of urbanization and villages and sedentary life and domestic life and family life and some security for the children and the community, and eventually it represents what I get very excited about, which is libraries, because you can't have that if you're roving about, nomad who's just living off hunting and gathering. Once you get your settled cities and urbanization structures, you can have writing and then libraries, and you can have scholars like me. So yes, bread is incredibly important, and it was invented there in the Holy Land, and that's the meaning of the word Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the house of bread. So Christ, the bread bringer, uses bread for his mysteries. He's the king of bread, if you want. Now, that's true of Judaism as a whole. Judaism is the bread religion, and it's today that we celebrate that. And what it's saying is, God is so merciful and gracious to us all that he allows us these crops to grow, to eat, to fulfill our hunger. So that's how it began, as an agricultural ritual. What the Jews do often is read the book of Ruth at this time. That's the tradition, which I think is a beautiful custom, and I might, later today read the whole thing. Because A, the story is set at harvest time, and B, Ruth's conversion to Judaism, she doesn't start as a Jew, she's a Moabite, which was like an Arab tribe, which had been quite hostile to the Jews. And so there's a story about Ruth becoming Jewish, which is very touching. It's about, she was like a Palestinian, okay? So the Jews made peace with the Palestinians finally. That's what I want to read in my future history books. That's what Ruth stands for. And also King David was born and died on this day, Shauvot, which shows how important it is. And he was connected with Bethlehem, and he builds the first Jewish settlements in Jerusalem and lays out the idea of the temple that his son Solomon builds. He's the king of bread too, which is stability, life, and wisdom, which is what the sacraments symbolize in Christianity. It's not bread, it's the body of God, it's the body of wisdom, which is the bread as a symbol of, and David, who was a wise king, knew all that, and he's a descendant of Ruth. So in synagogues around the world today, and yesterday, they'll be reading the book of Ruth, or in families and so on. And so, yeah, I think that's a beautiful tradition, because you see, if if the bread becomes wisdom, which is what it stands for and represents, then Shauvot also is the festival where they honour the coming of the Torah. And it's the day on which the Torah is revealed. Now, other scholars say, well, how's that possible? You have an agricultural harvest festival, and then you get the Torah coming down? Well, the Torah is the wisdom. So the point is that, yes, it's beautiful. You get the bread offering and the wisdom coming down, because man does not live on bread alone, as Christ said. Another thing that Shauvot represents is marriage, because it's the marriage between God, the groom, and Israel. And so in the religious literature around this festival of Shauvot, you have people saying that Mount Sinai, where the Torah comes down, is like the canopy of a wedding. The huppah, as it's called, a wedding canopy for the marriage. And that Sinai was held over the Israelites' heads, saying, accept my Torah or else, the canopy. And that Moses, when he comes down with the tablets and smashes them, they're the contract, the marriage contract, known as the ketubah, between Israel and God. So Moses is like the go-between and arranging a marriage. And it's customary, I think, to have marriages at this time of year as well in the Jewish community, and also throughout the world in the Christian community. And so it's also customary to write a ketubah between the people collectively and God. Here's an example. And I will set aside for thee in lieu of thy virginal faithfulness the life-giving Torah, by which thou and thy children will live in health and tranquility. The bride, Israel, consented and became his spouse. Thus an eternal covenant binding them forever was established between them. A marriage contract or covenant is like this covenant between Israel and God. And it's celebrated today, which I think is beautiful. And also that's why Pentecost, it's like the wedding party. What Jesus was saying is, this is such a beautiful thing, let's extend it to everybody. Let every tribe in on this covenant. We want a new covenant, an extension of the old, which now grants that divine Torah, that divine wisdom to all mankind. Even those Gaels up in the north of Scotland, or wherever. And that was, I think, the point of what Christ was trying to do, and kind of half succeeded. But it doesn't mean that the original covenant of the Torah is then, rescinded, and that the Jews are not in on that covenant. Of course they are. They're the original covenant people. And yet it's extended in grace and wisdom to every tribe. So that's Shauvot. So we have two beautiful events that I'm celebrating today with you, both Pentecost and Shauvot, which was its parallel, its origin. On the other hand, I'm also lamenting Brexit. As you know, I've been speaking about the metaphysics of Brexit. And I think, again, just to remind people, Brexit is about breaking a covenant. It's about breaking a covenant we swore when we joined the European Union as Brits. But even worse than that, it's breaking a covenant that the United Kingdom swore when we became one nation in the course of our bloody and conflictual history. When the Welsh and the English finally became one nation and promised to stop fighting in the Welsh marches, which they'd done for hundreds of years. When the Scots and the English finally decided to make a covenant and stop fighting when King James became the king of all the island. And when that covenant was then further confirmed when the parliaments were united in one in the early 1800s, and when the United Kingdom as such was brought into being in the early 19th century. These are the steps of our covenant making as a nation, and then we decided not to split up, we decided not to have civil wars. We haven't had a battle on the soil of Britain since 1745, when some people felt that, you know, the Scottish Stuarts were not being honoured and that they should be the rightful kings of Britain. And there are arguments they were right, but it was decided, you know, no, we're not going to go down that route. It inspired Walter Scott's great novels and so on, because he knew that the Jacobites had some, you know, righteousness on their side, but Britain as a whole decided to stay together, and we succeeded to prosper because of that during the time of Queen Victoria and, you know, the other members of the current dynasty. All that's put in peril by Brexit, and if you don't believe me, then just study it, research it, think about it. You know, peek outside your little box of thinking and look at the bigger picture. Study British history. Study the history of Ireland and the history of how the United Kingdom came into being and how the European Union came into being. I don't want to break the covenant. To me, it's like somebody interrupting a Shauvot festival and opening fire with a rifle, like horrible people have done, you know, in mosques and synagogues. There are really nasty, evil people about on this planet, sadly, who just think shooting random people and causing violence and chaos is, I don't know, a good idea. I mean, people like that mad guy in Norway who shot just young teenagers from the Social Democrat tradition, lovely people, just opened fire and killed loads of them. Or that killer in New Zealand who opened fire on Muslims just going about studies in their mosque. To me, Brexit is an action as extreme, the implications of it, as those mad people. And it's very interesting that those mad people are all connected with a sort of international right-wing, heinous network of people that eulogise Hitler and say that what Hitler was doing was right. The Jews should have been executed, massacred, you know, let's finish the job type of thing. And the people that Nigel Farage and Steve Bannon are working with are those extreme. They can deny it, but the facts are facts, and as a historian, having got into it, you know, you don't have to be... It helps if you have a degree in history to understand this. But that's what's going on behind the scenes. And so Brexit is a breaking apart, means literally break-up of Britain, rather than a uniting in love. And my metaphysics of the Holy Spirit, if you want, 40 years of research into it and existential engagement with it, have taught me that the Holy Spirit represents wholeness, the healing of division, the healing of conflict, the healing of literal wounds. You know, I used to work in medicine in hospitals, and I've seen people with seriously bad wounds. I've seen people dying of cancer. I've seen people dying of injuries, you know, in war. I've seen people with no legs because they were blown off in World War II. I've seen people who were wounded on D-Day and never got over it. I nursed them. And we've just celebrated that tragic battle. I don't want future battles. You know, war comes from division and breaking things apart. Brexit is a plot by, you know, the diabolic elements of history to revive that breaking apartness, that division. And I've said before, the intellectual heroes that these people worship on the right are people like Julius Evola, the Italian fascist intellectual, who thought that warriorship is a higher state than druidship. He completely inverted ethics. You know, he said the Brahmins, no, shoot them all. Kshatriyas are where we should go. And that's what's happening. That's why they look to people like Hitler and Mussolini, who were warriors, with no training in ethics. These people don't know right from wrong. They know how to shoot a rifle. That's it. Hitler should never have come into power over a nation as ancient and noble and as wise as Germany was. It was because the warriors seized power. And they did it illegally, with coups backed by referendums. That's how Hitler got to power in Germany. He was a fake leader. He had no qualifications to be head of Germany, apart from warriorship. And that's the same with Mussolini as well. He had no qualifications. He was funded by the British Secret Service, for God's sake, to become a little petty tyrant, and then he marched on Rome with his bully boys, fascisti. Literally, it was a warrior coup. And that's what Brexit is, and that's what Farage and his cronies are. They're little petty warriors that worship Julius Evola and the Kshatriya tradition. Well, that isn't coming from the Holy Spirit. It's not. It's coming from the opposite place. And this is a battle going back a long time. This is a battle Columba had to grieve over because he was desperately trying to stop the Celtic warriors killing each other. That's what saints do. What saints do is they download the Holy Spirit and they try and make peace. They try and make love last between peoples. They marry people. They do the Druid hand fasting rituals for people. We want people to fall in love and marry each other and be happy ever after. Not like sort of horror movies, right? There's the Kshatriya worshippers are making horror movies. The saints are making the hallmark romantic movies that end happily. I want, the world to be a happy ending. Well, a whole series of happy endings, not one happy ending. So that's why I'm opposing Brexit, because it's a breakup. It's a divorce between things that existentially should be interconnected. Europe is a magical land of many, many marvellous peoples and countries. I know because I've travelled all over it. I've been to Greece and all over the Balkans, France, Germany, Holland, etc., and all of Britain, Ireland. I love it all. I want it to stay together. It's like this periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions that I've done. Every tradition on the planet is sacred. They're all slightly different. They have their different interpretations. Christianity is the blue boxes. They have many different forms. There are Protestants, Reformed churches, Presbyterians, Pentecostalists, Quakers, Jehovah's Witnesses. Then there are Catholics, Dominicans, Jesuits, Anglicans, High Church, Low Church. There's all these different varieties, Orthodox, etc., etc. Well, they're all part of the one big family. I don't want them ever to go to war with each other or start attacking each other. A little bit about Islam, which is the light green. Again, there are different forms of Islam. They're all beautiful, actually. And Muhammad believed, as I'm explaining in my commentary on the Quran, that he was able to download the Holy Spirit as well, the Ruach HaKodesh. He wanted to be part of this work of unity. He saw Islam as bringing an update of the Holy Spirit to mankind because the Christians hadn't been living up to it. They'd been doing politics. They'd been rivaling about your version of the Trinity's wrong. No, your version is. Well, we'll kill you then. We'll persecute you. And so Cyril of Alexandria, so-called patriarch, had persecuted and had Hypatia killed. Oh, you're too intelligent. You're a Neoplatonic woman, philosopher. We'll have you killed. And he was having Nestorius persecuted. His uncle, Theophilus, had been Patriarch of Alexandria before him and had also persecuted even a great Orthodox saint, John Chrysostom. These people were just doing nasty, wicked stuff and calling it Christianity. That's not Christianity. That's not downloading the Holy Spirit. That's fakery and corruption. And Muhammad intuitively knew all this. He hadn't been to theological training college, but he had obviously an existential encounter with the Spirit. And that's where the Quran comes from. And I'm explaining that in detail, No one religion has a monopoly of spiritual enlightenment. He got his own download in his own amazing Arabic. And everyone should read the Quran and study my commentaries on it. And everyone should read the Bible, both the Jewish and Christian versions of it. And all the other scriptures, the Buddhist, the Hindu, whatever, because they all complement each other. So I'm with the people of unity. I'm with the people of faith against this splitting apart, this metaphysics of hurting, cutting, breaking. We saw that terrible photograph of those two lovely-looking girls on a bus in London being beaten up because they love each other. And some people are very prejudiced and no, love has got to be one way and it can't be, breaking boundaries. As someone like a druid that believes in reincarnation, I think that we've all been different genders and we've all had many lives, and we should learn tolerance and humility. If you're lucky enough to meet somebody you really love in this life, then you should love them. And if you happen to be both in the same body, well, it's in the same gender, well, it's just an accident of fate. It doesn't mean that you can't love each other. And so to be hateful, I think this kind of homophobia comes out of ignorance and hatred, and that's where all violence comes from. And I do see that there's a connection between Anne Widdecombe's kind of hate speech against platonic people that enjoy other people, and the kind of fanaticism that Brexit stands for. I think it's absolutely shocking that it's happening in my country. We should be standing for truth, and we should be standing in the light of Columba, who was a holistic thinker, a joined-up thinker, as are all the true saints. Okay, I also want to say that racism, which is where Brexit is coming from, is just the most simplistic and idiotic of breaking up type thinking. I mean, humanity is divided into many, many races, many different colours, types, and that's, as someone who studied anthropology, that's part of the beauty of human life, Every one of us is beautiful in our own way, whether we're black or white or yellow or red or whatever. Everyone is beautiful and different, and the Quran constantly reaffirms that. It says that if God had wanted to make us all white or all black, he could have done it, but instead he's made us all different colours. And let's affirm that. Let's just get behind this. This is God's plot for mankind, is to be many and one simultaneously, which is what Plato said is the hallmark of God, is that the divine unity is always having fun creating the manyness of things and then putting the manyness back together to reflect the divine unity. So in my commentary on the Quran, I'm explaining there's a particular form of commentary analysis that's called ta'wil, which means to take the words of the Quran back to their original unity in the mind of God. That's what I've spoken about in my book on the Kabbalah runes. So all the different texts and languages of humanity are manifestations of one ultimate unity, which the Quran calls the mother of the book, the mother of all the books. And that is what I think the Holy Spirit was doing at Pentecost. It was downloading and saying, hey, we're the mother of all the books here. We're the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, in person, turning up in history. Well, don't let it down, folks. Let's stand on the side of that spirit, stand on the side of love. Okay, another example of how we shouldn't be behaving is this ridiculous idea of war against Iran. I have many Iranian friends from my, travels around the world. I will personally be very upset if I have many American friends as well, and Russian, and from every region. I'll be deeply upset if idiots try and make a war against Iran. It will be, oh dear God, the most catastrophically ridiculous concept in history. And so I propose instead a peace treaty between the Iranians, the Americans, the Israelis, the British, the Europeans. They've said again and again and again, we're not developing nuclear weapons. They have to be believed. We've sent in inspectors. They're not developing nuclear weapons. Their president has said, we're not going to, they're un-Islamic. We have to believe these people are telling the truth, To not believe somebody when they tell the truth is pathological. It means you're such a liar yourself, you can't believe that anyone would actually be telling the truth. Obviously if they did secretly and started to use them, they'd be obliterated, but they're not doing that. They're good people deep down, just from a very different theology to what people in the West are used to. But if you study Islam, you can understand the Iranian tradition, which is deeply Shia, going back to Ali, who was the most ethical, really, of the successor caliphs to Muhammad. a very, very wise man, the husband of Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, and a very learned man, also literate. Ali was a great, great man, and the Shias love him. He's the founder of their branch of Islam. Do some study on Shiism, and this need for war will just evaporate. I've watched a very brilliant documentary of a film journey across Iran, which you can find on YouTube, and it's so beautiful to see ordinary Iranians going up and down on a train. It goes all the way from the south of Iran, where the oil fields are, near the border with Iraq, all the way up through Qom, which is their great theological study centre, where the imams are trained in tafsir and Quranic studies and so on, and then goes all the way up to the Caspian Sea, where it has an end. And this wonderful railway, which was built by the Tsar, the Shah, is still, a very important artery for the Iranian economy and people. And I don't want to see that bombed. I don't want to see these people's lives disrupted. I mean, what right does America think it has to even think of doing something like that? The UN has to get serious and just tell America, look, hands off. This is a war crime if you're even contemplating it. And whoever's in charge of the White House and Congress has to pass bills that make the military stand down. If it's the American military trying to trigger wars in order to foster their own sense of self-importance, and give me another 10 billion for a whole new bunch of planes and so on, that needs stopping. Again, it's the warriors trying to take control of humanity. And what I'm saying as a peace druid of Europe and a peace campaigner, philosophers of peace, for many years, coordinator of, is these warriors have to be stood down, and we need statesmen and women of the stature of Kennedy and Roosevelt and the great presidents of the American people, Jefferson and even Washington, who was a warrior, but at least he knew when to stop fighting. He knew when to start building a country. So the genuine presidential people in America need to get these warriors disciplined. And the same in every country in Britain. The people that seem to have backed Brexit are the warrior types who they're fake warriors because they've never actually fought. They don't know how horrendous war is and to be avoided at all costs. No, they're the arms dealers, the people like Philip May that are making profits out of war in the Yemen. I mean, it's scandalous that Philip May should have been persuading the Prime Minister to be so intransigent with her Brexit policies. Utterly shocking, in my opinion. The man should go back to school, as should his wife. So no war with Iran. Instead, let's study the spiritual wholeness. Let's find out how the Holy Spirit works inside Islam. I'm sick of these right-wing evangelical Christians going on about how they hate Islam. These people have never studied it, never met a proper Muslim, never encountered it at an existential level. Where are the real evangelicals of America who are authentic upholders of the Holy Spirit, who are the true intellectual heroes that we need now to engage existentially in peace with our Islamic brothers and sisters, and doing a lot of in-depth research into the origins of Islam and the Quran. There's all this fake stuff on the internet about, there was no Muhammad, there was no Quran. It's all just absolute nonsense. It's propaganda pumped out by complete brain-dead, people that, they're on the intellectual equivalent of cocaine, like it turns out. Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, all these Tories going for Brexit are all cocaine freaks. Well, it totally fits. So was the Bush dynasty. It makes you so convinced you're right, you cannot even hear another person's point of view. Well, that's Brexit in a nutshell. It's a cocaine nightmare. So let's just come off the drugs, folks. Let's get off that and let's have an authentic high, which comes from the actual Holy Spirit. Okay, I'm coming to the end. I want to just share one last thing. So when I worked in London in my early days as a scholar in the 80s, I was working on what is the Holy Spirit. I was studying Hegel. Das Geist in Hegel is the Spirit, and it's what hovers over all of history. And in Marx, it becomes the moving force behind dialectical processes. And so what is it that's doing the moving behind history? I went to a lecture by the president of Germany, who was visiting London at the time. I was going to all the kind of events. I was sitting on the board of the World Federalist Association, which used to meet in Parliament. And what I've always done as an intellectual and philosopher is try and find the wholeness. Try and see how the Holy Spirit is working to bring unity and peace in this conflict, in this, be it a micro conflict between a couple who are falling out or a macro conflict between companies and countries. I think the Holy Spirit will always find a way to unite, to heal, to bring into alignment and harmony. So my finding is that peace will come when we discover love, because that's what the Holy Spirit finally brings us. And that's why I launched, when I set up the Institute at the University of London, I was paid to research and establish an Institute of Peace. I wrote a feasibility study and set it up in 1981. At the time the Gulf War was breaking out, the first one. And I've been doing it ever since. And in 93 we brought out the first journal of the Institute, which is the first and only academic journal in the world devoted to the study of love, which is ridiculous but true. All my academic colleagues, they're brilliant, I love them. They do little detailed papers and they publish them in each other's journals. I'm the only guy that's ever said, let's have a journal on the nature of love. I hope it'll be still running, when I reincarnate again in 500 years to check up everything's okay. Because we need more research on love, I tell you that. Okay, now I'm coming to the end. I want to just say another little bit of news. This is the personal bit, which is very exciting. And I hope I'm not embarrassing anyone, but my youngest daughter, Shanti Grace Daffern, who is a dear soul, she's doing a degree at Oxford University. She's doing a PhD in poetry and so on. But today, she chose to get baptised in the church in Oxford. And so this is just well done to Shanti, really, because she's my youngest daughter. And in a sense, by accepting baptism on this holy day of Pentecost, what she's saying is, I want to be part of that Holy Spirit tradition as well, like my dad and my mum. Her mum's a Quaker. And to me, it's like an initiation, right? And we all have to have these initiations. I was baptised at the University of London when I was a student there in the 80s, during this time when I was researching, the interconnectedness of all things. And I think it's just a way of saying, look, I want to be on the team of this wholeness enterprise, like Columba, like Christ, like Paul, like Luke, like Mary Magdalene, And that doesn't mean I don't want to be on the Moses and the Zoroaster and the Buddha teams. No, I'm on all of them. It's a universal team. It's the Muhammad team, it's the Ali team as well. Because ultimately, there's one ultimate existential reality behind it all. And the Torah is revealed through different tribes at different times and different places. In a sense, we should upgrade the notion of Shauvot into a universal Torah that then manifests in different traditions. Every tribe has its own Sinai. Every tradition has its own prophets. And that's what the Quran says. That's what the Pentecost thing says. It comes out in everybody's language. So yes, Shanti, well done, bless you. I would have been there had I had a bit more warning. But I was only told this yesterday. So anyway, I hope it all went well. And to me, it's great that happened in Oxford, at the church in Oxford, because a university is the place where we study universality. Everything I'm talking about, this true universal perspective on life, is what a university is about. It's because I've had an extremely good academic education in the university tradition that I've come to see all this. I've been able to see all the joined upness behind everything.